Take me to the place in the middle of the sun. And we'll sing this song, sing it one by one.
What's going on, guys?
Welcome to today's interview. Thank you for joining us.
Were you going to say welcome to I Do Podcast?
I was, but I'm switching it up.
And we changed the name. I wanted to tell our listeners officially.
Oh, we did?
Yeah, in iTunes.
Oh, we did. But it was never ID Podcast in iTunes. We changed that a while ago. You're a little late. You're a little late to the game.
but it's like the Relationship Advice Podcast now.
Yes, that's what it is in iTunes.
Cool.
That's why you found us.
So welcome to the Relationship Advice Podcast.
Yes.
For those of you that don't know, 5 years ago, it started as I Do Podcast. And then Sarah and I decided we didn't love the name, but we also had the URL, idopodcast.com. All the tech stuff was tied to that. And rather than change all that, we just changed it on iTunes. And this is the official, unofficial announcement that's a year late, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So welcome to the Relationship Advice Podcast. Thank you for joining us today. We have a great show for you where we welcome Dr. David Ludden. He is a professor of psychology at Georgia Gwinnett College and author of the blog Talking Apes on Psychology Today. And today we talk about how couples can negotiate the frequency of sex. This can be a tricky topic. So Dr. Ludden gives us a lot of great tools, a little bit about the research behind our sexuality, cultural implications, and then we finish off with interesting discussion on the evolution of human sexuality, which I want to do a full dedicated show on.
Yeah.
Would be really cool.
It's super interesting.
So as always, thank you guys for tuning in, leaving us reviews on iTunes, telling your friends and family. We appreciate you guys for listening. Enjoy today's show.
Today's show is brought to you by our online course, Spark My Relationship. Create more passion, improve your communication, and build a stronger, more intimate connection with your partner in less than 90 days. We've collaborated with 15 therapists and psychologists to bring you the strategies marriage therapists teach their clients. To unlock a special offer only for I Do Podcast listeners, visit sparkmyrelationship.com/unlock. That's sparkmyrelationship.com/unlock. Hi, Dr. Ludden. Thank you so much for joining us back on the show.
It's good to be here again. Thank you.
Today, we are going to talk about a hotly contested subject, I'm sure, for a lot of our listeners out there. I know Sarah and I have dealt with this, and that is how we can negotiate the frequency of sex in our relationship. So where is the best place to start on this hot topic?
Well, in my blog, I was reporting on an article that was published by a group of Norwegian psychologists who were working with people who are in committed relationships. And they were looking at things such as relationship satisfaction, ideal frequency of sex, actual frequency of sex. So what they found in these is, first of all, some of the findings were probably not surprising. For the most part, it was the men who wanted more sex than the women. That's probably not surprising. But also, what they found in their particular group was that it was generally the women who were determining the frequency of sex. So the men were basically acquiescing to the level of frequency that their partners wanted, and the researchers were kind of came to the conclusion that this was a Norwegian sample, highly intelligent, mainly generally very intelligent, well-educated couples living in a modern industrial society where there's a very strong attitude of sexual equality, and of course the message that no means no is very, very clear. And so what they see is that in their sample at least, it seemed to be that the men were acquiescing to the level of frequency that, well, the higher sex drive partner was acquiescing to the frequency of the lower sex drive partner, which in most cases was the male being the higher and the female being the lower. So that's sort of the background that I was reporting on in my blog.
So that's just it, right? Is our natural biology of each partner, and cultural conditioning comes into play, but
right.
And we could talk about those, but let's just use the example. One partner has a higher sex drive than the other.
Yeah.
Probably pretty common. So how can those two partners begin a discussion of wanting to have more sex in the relationship?
Well, you see, that's the thing that the researchers find when they look at an individual level. What they found was that actually the partners that they looked at were fairly well matched in terms of levels of sexual desire, and that they also found that the levels of sexual desire tended to be also related in general to open attitudes about sexuality, including discussing sexuality. So what we're really coming down to is the issue is that couples who do have sex frequently are also talking about sex. They're actually openly negotiating the sexual frequency and the sexual acts and times in which they're comfortable in engaging in these acts. But what the researchers suspect were happening with the couples who were having sex considerably less frequently is that probably what was going on is these people weren't talking about it. Probably the higher sex drive partner was rebuffed a number of times and then just sort of gave up and let the lower sex drive partner sort of take the lead in the relationship. So in a sense, there's no negotiation that's going on in those particular cases.
Yeah, I find it's a difficult issue in the relationship with Sarah and I. It has been in the past, and I'm sure a lot of relationships, because I think Sarah would agree. I'm more of the higher sex drive partner. She's nodding her head, and what has happened in the past is I would acquiesce, not because Sarah's like, no, I just wouldn't try to initiate because I didn't want to feel turned down or rejected. And that's probably something pretty common that happens. Is that something you see? And then maybe we could talk about how to deal with it.
Well, yeah, I think that is what happened. That's what the researchers, that's the conclusion the researchers came to, was that the higher sex drive partner was just not initiating anymore because they were afraid of rejection. And this actually kind of goes in both directions. You feel bad when you were rejected, but the rejecting partner can also feel bad about rejecting. Kind of creates a tension in the relationship. And so there's got to be discussions about frequency of sex and what, when and where and so on, that are part of initiating sex at that time. So you have to open up communication about what sorts of things you are, interested in, open to, and so on, without the only discussion about sex being during the time when you're trying to initiate.
So for couples who are listening, maybe they never have had this conversation before in their relationship, and so it feels overwhelming to bring up this conversation. Do you have any recommendations of where to start if it seems like a hopeless conversation?
Well, that's a very good point. And in fact, other research shows that many couples do not talk about sex. It is something that, I guess in our society, we have the attitude that sex is something you do, you don't talk about. I think there are a lot of things I think you need to do. First of all, you need to kind of examine your own attitudes about that. So you have to ask yourself, if you're comfortable, regardless of whether you're the higher sex drive partner or the lower sex drive partner, you should be kind of examining yourself whether you are comfortable talking about these and whether there are ways you could become more comfortable about talking about them, about these issues. There are plenty of couples who do feel very open about talking about sex, and they're the ones who actually end up having more sex because they can negotiate a compromise that's happy for both of them. But I just say, kind of exploring inside your own mind what it is what are the inhibitions that you have about talking about sex. Sex is of the utmost importance in a marriage. It's really what defines a marriage for many, or committed relationship, I should say, for many other relationships that you have. So it is something you need to be able to talk about.
I want to highlight the importance of having the conversation outside of the times that you're trying to engage in sex, because that's often what Sarah and I found early on before we started negotiating in a more productive manner was I would initiate and Sarah wouldn't want to have sex. She wasn't in the mood, whatever. And then we would have the conversation. I would feel rejected and it wasn't that productive because we were both like feeling defensive and I was feeling rejected and we have all these emotions. So just picking a time, I don't know, lunchtime. Most people aren't having sex around lunchtime. Just or a time that is not normally intimate and setting that aside and be like, hey, let's talk about sex.
Yeah, exactly. Don't talk about sex in bed. Do the sex in bed, but talk about it in another location at a different time. And you also mentioned about the defensiveness. Don't do it at a time when you're defensive. Obviously, if you've just been rejected, you're both going to be defensive at that point. And I'd also say kind of try to find a time when you can ease into the discussion. And if you find your partner getting really uneasy and starting to get defensive, maybe back off a little bit and approach it again on a little bit later, or maybe lighten up the conversation first and try to approach it again. If this occasion just isn't going to work, just go to back off and try it on another occasion. It can be really hard for people to overcome the inhibitions they have about talking about sex. And so chances are pretty good that both members of the couple, if they're not already in the habit of talking about it, both couples are actually going to feel uncomfortable about it at the beginning. But, it's like most things. They feel very uncomfortable when you think about doing them or when you first get started. But once you get into it, it's really not that bad.
Can you talk a little bit about the biology and the maybe cultural impact of our sexual desires and maybe our expectations of the frequency?
Well, yeah, a lot of things are playing into that. First of all, there's no such thing as a normal frequency. That should not ever come up. You shouldn't. Well, I read in a magazine somewhere that the average couple has sex once a week, so you shouldn't ask me for more often than that. You shouldn't even talk about that. I mean, certainly we can do an average. We can ask people sexual frequencies and calculate an average. But then what you're doing is you're gathering together all the numbers from people who don't have sex at all to people who have sex multiple times a day, and then that one time a week just doesn't say anything. You have to find a frequency that fits that fits both of you. Typically, men have a higher sex drive than women, partially for, I would say, for social reasons, as they've been told they should be. Part of being a real man is being sexually active. I think part of the reason why women in our society have a lower sex drive or report a lower sex drive is because they've been taught that they shouldn't have a high sex drive. That we shame women who have high sex drives and are open about that. I think you know what I mean by that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And so the part of it has been taught to them. It's not always the case that men have more sex drive than women. What I've heard from marriage counselors is that when they're dealing with clients, and by the way, this is the number one issue that marriage counselors deal with. Pretty much the number one problem. And they report that anywhere between a quarter and a third of the time it's the woman who actually has a higher sex drive than the man. So we have to keep that in mind. There are multiple things that are going on. As we get older, men start facing issues such as erectile dysfunction, and that can cause anxiety and kind of anxiety about initiating sex because they're not confident that they're going to be able to perform. Those sorts of issues. And most of that occurs. Most of the reason for erectile dysfunction is either poor health. So you haven't been taking care of yourself, not eating right, not getting enough physical activity, and some drugs also have that effect. So you need to be looking at those if that's the issue. As we're looking at older couples, of course, menopause is going to be an issue with women. During the menopause period, a lot of women tend to have a reduced sex drive, but kind of in the post-menopause period, it depends. Some women go back to their previous levels, and sometimes women actually increase their sexual desire after menopause because there's no danger of pregnancy at that point, and they feel much freer about expressing themselves sexually. So there's a lot of variation that's going on in that.
I'm glad you pointed out, the cultural implications of what men and women are told, and obviously our biology is at play too. But we had Wednesday Martin, who recently came out with a book, Untrue, Rethinking Female Sexuality. She was on episode 204, but basically talking about how women have been told a certain narrative, as have men, based on movies and writing and articles online that aren't really backed in the fact that most sex researchers were male historically. That's changing. But anyways, important things to consider. So if you haven't, our listeners, check that out. Check out episode 204. But it's so important to recognize culturally the narratives we're told. I think it has such a huge impact on, I can only speak as a man. Like, we're supposed to be sexual, and you may not even want to have sex that much, but that's what you're supposed to do. And you don't even think about it like that because we're so imprinted culturally with these ideas.
That's right. And that's why you need to do some kind of self-reflection, reading such as sources as you just mentioned to help you understand how these attitudes have been kind of programmed into you from a very early age, and that you don't actually have to follow the scripts that society has given to you.
I'm curious, based on the research, you mentioned that the couples that were communicating about sex had closer sex drives. Is that what you said? And then is it the couples that were not communicating and not having as much sex were kind of more mismatched?
No, that isn't what they found. In this particular sample, at any rate, what they found was that there was a fairly good match. That is, if you were a man who wants to have sex every day, you might be in a relationship with a woman who maybe doesn't want it every day, but every other day sounds pretty good. And even there can be some conflicts going on. The one partner wants it more than the other one does. What they found is what is in psychology called assortative mating. What it means is that we tend to find partners, or we tend to select partners who are similar to us in many aspects. Our religious beliefs, political beliefs, similar educational backgrounds, similar social backgrounds, that sort of thing. And it turns out that attitudes towards sex seem to be one of the issues that people tend to look at when they are developing a committed relationship with each other. So it wasn't the case that there were people in their sample. It wasn't necessarily the case that the people who weren't having sex very often or were having difficulties with sex were mismatched. It really seems to be an issue of communication, or lack of communication, I should say.
Yeah, like a lot of relationship issues coming to that. It's like sometimes we expect our partner to read our minds of the frequency we want to have sex, and we're upset that they're not initiating it more when Meanwhile, you've never communicated explicitly, hey, I really would like it if we could have sex 2 times a week. It sounds a bit diplomatic as far as it takes away from the romance of just initiating or whatever. But the reality is, to have a healthy relationship, we can't assume anything from our partners, and we need to communicate directly and clearly. So literally sitting down and communicating your needs in a productive way of how often you want it, that's going to be the best path forward. Let's take a break and talk about today's sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Plan to Eat.
So I am a big fan of planning out my meals in advance for the week and only having to go to the grocery store once.
I have like a weird thing about going to the grocery store more than once a week.
You do, and I think it's rubbed off on me. So I'm in the same boat. But I am horrible about organizing recipes and creating lists for the grocery store. I always end up forgetting like the crucial ingredient for whatever recipe I'm trying to make. And so we end up making like boring salads with grilled chicken. So no fun.
They're all right sometimes.
It's okay. But for me, it's super important that Stella is introduced to a variety of flavors and foods, which means we need to start cooking a lot more. And Plan to Eat makes it a whole lot easier to do that.
Plan to Eat was born from their desire to eat real and delicious food prepared at home. Plan to Eat is a tool to help you prepare delicious, wholesome food that nourishes both body and soul.
So here is how it works. And I just gave Chase the whole demonstration and he is
cool.
Super stoked. So Plan to Eat is a subscription service that gives you the tools to clip and organize recipes from any website. I just showed him how I clipped from like multiple websites. Create a meal plan, and then their software automatically creates and organizes a shopping list based on your plan. And like I just mentioned, I just added my favorite Kenyan braised beef recipe, which is so good. And I literally copy and pasted the URL and it turned it into a perfect grocery list. And it was super pretty because it's formatted like by each area in the grocery store of what you need to get. And so I am super stoked to use it.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive, just like the technology or whatever's going on with the algorithm.
I just don't even know what that is. It's amazing.
How it does that. And with your subscription, you can access your meal plans and shopping lists on your desktop and their mobile app. And they have a full-time support team to help you get started and answer any questions that you may have. Plan to Eat offers monthly and yearly options for $4.95 a month or $39 a year. That's only 75 cents a week.
Whoa.
Less than $1.
Less than $1, people.
If you didn't know what 75 cents was. And they also include a free, fully functional 30-day trial with no payment required, so you can easily see if it's right for you.
Plan to Eat only has one big sale per year, but if you visit plantoeat.com/ido, you can start a 60-day trial instead of their normal 30-day trial.
For free.
For free. So check it out. We know it will make your life a lot easier like it has for mine. So visit plantoeat.com/ido to start your free 60-day trial.
Today's episode is also brought to you by the Pill Club.
If you're on birth control, remembering to take your pill is already enough work. I remember I would always mess mine up every month.
And that's why we have a 4-year-old.
And that's why we have a 4-year-old.
Just kidding.
So going back to that, remembering to take it, going to the doctors to get a refill, and picking up the pharmacy is a huge pain. And Pill Club wants to take the work out of taking care of yourself. Pill Club is a birth control subscription that is delivered straight to your door. And most prescriptions are free with insurance or Medicaid. And without insurance, they can be as low as $3.99 a month. Shipping is always free and discreet, and Pill Club schedules deliveries so that you always have your next dose on hand before you need it. So skip the office visit and the line at the pharmacy and join the club.
Right now, when you go to thepillclub.com/I-do, they're offering our listeners a new way to get birth control and special care package with every delivery. That's thepillclub.com/I-do to get your first birth control care package. Remember, thepillclub.com/I-do.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned something here, which is another one of those cultural scripts that we've accepted. And you said it doesn't sound very romantic if you're scheduling sex, but that's part of the issue here is that we have this kind of idea that sex is supposed to happen spontaneously, and there's going to be this moment when both of you just want it right then, and you know you both want it, and that's the way sex is always supposed to be. That's the way it's represented in movies, for example. And when you're first dating, first getting into your relationship, oftentimes you do have those sort of spontaneous moments when both of you are in the mood right then, and you really want to do it. But that sort of initial passion does die down in a long-term relationship. We have to recognize that fact that sort of passion isn't always going to be there, but you can still have a very meaningful sexual relationship with your partner, so long as you're communicating about what your needs and desires are, and listening, not just telling your partner what you want, but also listening to your partner and what their needs are.
I think that kind of goes along the lines of something that Chase and I would struggle with would be that we would communicate what we wanted sexually, and it would be really good for a while, and then slowly things would start to diminish down. And I'm sure that happens with a lot of couples, because when you take the attention or the focus away from it, it starts to go away. And so I guess, do you have any advice for the best ways to navigate that in terms of, maybe it's just setting up a communication once a month or, every couple months to make sure that it's a focus on the relationship?
Yeah. I think that if you kind of get into the habit of talking about sex with your partner, it should get easier. And you can see that you can make, you can communicate with each other when the need arises. Yeah, I think it might not be a bad idea to even just to schedule times when you're just going to talk about it. Sure. In a long-term relationship, you've got to find ways of kind of managing all the things that you're going to do. I mean, sex is a very important part of the relationship, but you can have other things. You got kids that you have to take care of and jobs and so on. We schedule our jobs. We schedule the things that we do with our kids. Sure, we should be scheduling our intimate time and our discussions about our intimacy needs as well. Absolutely.
Put it on a shared calendar. And I'm not kidding. Like, literally put it on the calendar and for the talk, and then after you have the talk, perhaps if you have a really busy life, you can, or even if you don't, put the sex on the calendar. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Again, culturally, like you said, we're told spontaneous, go on a date. And unfortunately, life doesn't work that way all the time. So there's nothing wrong with that in really just having that open,
that's right,
clear communication. Do you have any interest or read any research in our evolutionary need for variety and multiple partners to perhaps keep the novelty and interest in a long-term relationship or versus monogamy?
Sure. Well, what you're getting at is you're asking the question of what sort of relationships lifestyle did humans evolve to have versus what we have in contemporary society. And if we look at hunter-gatherer societies, which is where we all came from originally, what we see is a mixture of short and long-term relationships. You don't necessarily see lifelong monogamy. I mean, it does happen. Sometimes couples fall in love with each other and really do want to stay with each other for the rest of their lives. But you see a sort of a serial monogamy with occasional other short-term partners. That's sort of that tends to be the pattern that we see in hunter-gatherer societies. In modern society, we still have this. We haven't. Well, actually, in modern society, we have sort of gone back to serial monogamy because after half of all marriages end in divorce, and those people tend to remarry. So that's basically what's happening. But we seem to have this attitude that lifelong monogamy is the natural relationship style for humans, and it's not. And we need to recognize that it's a culturally imposed relationship style. And if we want to make lifelong monogamy work, then we have to approach it as a kind of a lifelong project that we need to work on, and not just assume that this is the natural style and we don't need to work on it. You mentioned the idea of variety. That's why you have to have more variety within the things that you do and in your relationship, adding different kind of changes to your lifestyle. Weekend getaways and things like that, where you can act differently from normal life. There is definitely going to be an issue of this need for variety. And I also want to add in the issue of fantasy in our sex lives. Some people have the attitude, well, if you're not thinking about me while we're having sex, then I don't want to be part of it. But maybe you should allow your partner to fantasize on occasion, as opposed to having them actually straying from you.
We could have a whole series of podcasts dedicated to this research and information. I think it's fascinating because it's an area. Obviously, relationships are a huge part of our lives, everyone's lives, hopefully, and we tend to not question the things we do when it comes to everything, communicating about sex and just question the format, the container of relationships, being that, let's say, monogamy. That is the culturally accepted way to be with a person, romantically and sexually. And because it's such a part of our upbringing and our culture, and we don't really think about it. I didn't think about it until I think just after college. And I was an anthropology major. I'm studying like hunter-gatherer societies and I'm learning about like in Nepal and the Himalayas, women have multiple husbands because they live in very remote locations. So in order to like basically resupply the family and the household, the men have to rotate in and bring, food. And so those wives actually have multiple husbands. And so in that culture.
Yeah, they tend to be brothers, though. We should actually emphasize that. They tend to be brothers.
Very cool.
Wow.
I didn't know that part.
Yeah. Because it's the brothers who have the family ranch, I guess, what you call it's a herding society. And so you need the men to herd the whatever animals it is they're herding, and the woman is brought into that remote location and they're shared among the brothers. And that means that whoever actually fathers each individual child, there's still quite a bit of genes that are being shared there. So it's not like you're competing with men who don't have any genes similar to yours. It's all being kept in the family.
Very cool. So we won't talk about sperm selection and that whole theory.
Yeah. No, that actually doesn't. No, that would be pretty. That could cause quite a lot of conflict.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I didn't know the brothers, but that's just. I love that example because it shows how culturally, like, that's what worked and logistically, and so that's the format that is accepted in that area. Yeah. And we have this format of monogamy that arose from farming and land rights and now we come 10,000 years later from the advent of farming, more or less, and we don't really question the modern evolution of it. And like you said, a lot of those monogamous pairings are actually serial monogamy and they're not working. So again, I'm not sitting here and saying that there's a better way necessarily, but just to think about the other ways, or it could be as simple as being okay with your partner fantasizing about another person, because in a lot of monogamous relationships, that might be considered cheating. You might as well be cheating if you're thinking about someone else, right?
Well, that's the attitude some people would have about it. It's this attitude that once we get married or once we're in a committed relationship, you should want me and only me and not think about anybody else. But that's not going to be the case. You're going to be attracted to other people. Your partner's going to be attracted to other people. You should simply be open about it. Just to certainly accept that aspect of us as humans, that we are sexually attracted to multiple people, because that's the way we're designed. And what we're trying to do is work our biology into a system that our society has set up. And so and that system really conflicts with our biology a lot. So we really have to be open about it and think about ways that we can accommodate our biological needs while also meeting the requirements of our society.
I think just that realization is good. You're not preaching that people need to be a certain way, but it's just enlighten yourselves, read a little bit more. It might just make you feel better about yourself and not feeling guilty for desiring another man sexually outside of your husband because you see him and you're attracted to him. I think we're taught that that's a sinful thing. That's a bad thing. Don't let your eyes wander, these kind of things. And it's just counter to our biology. Yes.
Right. Lusting in your heart, that sort of, those sort of expressions, right? As if that is just as bad as cheating. And I think we need to get over that issue, and understand that, that's, there's nothing wrong with it. That's natural. You shouldn't feel guilty about feeling attractions to other people.
And I'm sure that guilt and that shame carries over into a relationship, especially if you don't feel like you can communicate about it with your partner.
Well, that's right. Yes, these attitudes that we have about how a marriage is supposed to be and how our sexuality is supposed to be really do lead people to experiencing high levels of guilt. And they're feeling guilt about things that they have no control over and actually are quite natural.
And do you see this changing? Because personally, obviously, Sarah and I are very involved in the relationship information world, if you want to call it that. And it seems like there's a lot of podcasts and books being written about things like open marriage, polyamory, and that information is being more widely distributed than ever. It's been around for a while, and there's been more research. What are you seeing on your end?
Well, there's a lot of information out there, but people have to access the information. If you have very strong inhibitions about sexuality, then you may not even be looking for that information online. The people who are looking for that information are the ones who are recognizing that there's something not quite right in their lives or their relationships and want to get more information about how to make it better. So certainly there's a lot more information out there. I also suspect that the younger generation, the people just now coming into sexual maturity, are in many ways far more informed than previous generations were about sexuality. And so I get a sense that there's a lot more openness to sexual varieties, say sexual orientations, sexual styles, that sort of thing. And so I think the information is getting out there, but it may be a very slow change in our society that might take generations. And if I think about it that way, I think it already has been several generations of slow change in our society. certainly my grandparents would never have considered divorce. Right, marriage is a lifelong commitment. By my parents' generation, divorce was still very rare and scandalous when it occurred. In my generation, and I'm in my 50s, to give you a sense of what I'm talking about here, a divorce is not uncommon and it's not scandalous. We'll see what's happening and actually in kind of the up and coming generation. If I think about my children's age, who are like in their 20s now, you see people in this generation are postponing marriage, or maybe not even getting married at all. They're entering into committed relationships, but they're not necessarily getting married. So we do see a change that's going on here in terms of sexual attitudes, but it's slow.
Are we evolving into where we evolved from? Seems like that's happening.
I wouldn't use the word evolve in this case, because it's certainly not. It's not natural selection that's happening. What I think is happening is that we are going back to our natural sexual state. I think that's what you're trying to get at. While we were an agricultural society and everybody was tied to the land, lifelong monogamy was necessary in order to keep property rights and so on together. You needed to have that sort of stability. And by the way, we should also kind of keep this in mind, because even this is true even today, is that when we were talking about marriage, and the kind of a marriage that developed in agricultural societies, we're really talking about an economic arrangement, and that's really what it was, and actually what it still is today. Marriage is still an economic arrangement. You get all sorts of tax breaks. You report your taxes as a couple, but only if you're married. If you're cohabiting, even if you've been cohabiting for years, but you're not married, you're going to be reporting your taxes separately. You're not going to be getting tax breaks and so on for being married. So it is still an economic relationship on top of being a sexual relationship and other things too. Parental relationship. It's a many-faceted relationship, I guess we should say. And all those things come into play in marriage.
I think the intersection of culture and biology is fascinating, not just in sexuality, but in nutrition. And we'll have to have you back on, and we could just dedicate a whole show to talking about our evolution of sexuality and culture. I think it's really interesting. Sure. We'll have to do that. And last thing before we wrap up is related to that is you mentioned going back to rather than evolving to. You see that with like the paleo diet and basically us realizing we need to get away from the processed foods and get back to the way we evolved to eat. And that has a lot of, I'm not saying paleo, but just eating things that grow from the ground and walk or swim, whole foods. And that has good health benefits because that's where we evolved from. It's a little bit harder with relationships and sexuality, figuring out exactly what was going on. But with research that you're doing and others, we're getting a better idea of what works and doesn't work, and then looking to the past and then forming a better way forward is really what we want to be doing.
I think that's absolutely correct.
Well, Dr. Ludden, thanks again for all of this great information. I'm glad we got to talk about the evolution of sexuality a little bit at the end here, and at the start with negotiating the frequency of sex. Sarah and I have definitely benefited by having those open communications, and we encourage our listeners to do that as well. Before we wrap up, can you tell our listeners where they can find you online, and then we'll say goodbye?
Sure. I'm the author of the blog Talking Apes on Psychology Today. So you just visit psychologytoday.com and you can search my name, David Ludden, and you can find my blog where I talk about many of these issues. One of the main themes in my blog is about communication in relationships. That's why I have a number of blog posts on topics related to this.
Excellent. Well, we'll have those links on your show notes page on idopodcast.com. And again, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Hi, guys. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. As always, all the links are in the show notes page, as well as on the podcast description. And while you're on our website, we encourage you guys to check out our 14-day Happy Couple Challenge. We send you an email for 14 days with simple, doable challenges to help strengthen and improve your relationship. And on our website, we also have a bunch of free resources for your relationship. So we encourage you to check those out. We also have our Love Tribe on Facebook. We encourage you guys to join the tribe and be there for support for each other. If you have questions or just need some relationship advice, we are all here for each other. The group has grown to almost 1,000 people, and we love it. So we hope you guys join that. You can go to Facebook, Love Tribe Fam, and you'll find us right there. And if you are interested in learning more about our flagship course, Spark My Relationship, we hope you guys check it out. We have a special offer that is only for podcast listeners. So you can go to sparkmyrelationship.com/unlock, and you can unlock that special offer and learn more. As always, thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next week.